Hello, I'm Eduardo Guerrero, urban designer. Welcome to Crossing City Limits, a podcast about the environment and culture, a virtual place where designers and urban idealists share their stories without limits.
A metric that is much better at describing how people experience this heat is this radiant temperature, because that includes the direct sunlight that adds a lot of heat load to your body.
In this episode, I speak with urban climatologist Ariane Middel about thermal comfort, the urgency of urban shade for pedestrians, and human-climate interactions in cities. Thank you, Ariane, for joining me in this podcast. I am eager to learn more about urban shade or sombra.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Please give us an outline of your late research projects.
We are looking into, as you just said, we're looking into shade. We just completed a study that we dubbed 50 grades of shade, where we looked at different shade types to see how effective they are in keeping people cool in the desert. And then we also just completed the first phase of a project in collaboration with the city of Phoenix, where we look at cool pavement as a strategy to cool the urban environment. And then another ongoing study is we're developing a IoT, an Internet of Things, mini cheap sensing device that can sense how people use spaces and measure how people experience these spaces at the same time.
Would you please tell us about your robot? I believe her name is Marty. Or is a he?
Yes, exactly. It's a he, I guess, or it. So Marty measures the heat load on the human body. So Marty measures the radiation that hits your body as you're walking or standing outside. And there are 3 sets of sensors attached to Marty that measure the long and shortwave radiation, which is essentially you can think of it as the amount of sunlight that hits your body, the UV radiation that hits your body, and also the heat that comes off of hot surfaces. So as you're standing on a parking lot that has been sun exposed all day, you can feel the heat creeping at you. So that's also something Marty would measure. And Marty is called Marty because Marty measures MRT, which stands for mean radiant temperature, and that's the heat load that I just described.
How portable is Marty? How do you move all your instruments to the field?
Yes, actually, Marty is mobile. So Marty is a set of sensors that are attached to a $70 garden cart that other people use to haul their leaves in the garden. So the sensors are attached to this garden cart, and you can pull Marty everywhere you like, and you can set him up under a tree or under a shade structure on the parking lot to measure the heat load on the human body.
So you talk about the radiant heat. How important is that concept? There's different types of heats or different type of measurements that you are performing with Marty?
Exactly. So the most common heat that people talk about is actually the air temperature. So that's the heat you would get from your weather report in the morning when you watch TV or from your phone. And that's the actual temperature of the air. But a metric that is much better at describing how people experience this heat is this radiant temperature, because that includes the direct sunlight as it hits your body. And in areas such as Tucson, Phoenix, and in the desert Southwest, where it's not very humid, it's really this direct sunlight that adds a lot of heat load to your body. So the mean radiant temperature is much more relevant to how we experience heat in the summer than the actual air temperature.
Right. I imagine that people in different parts of the world, regarding their culture, have different tolerance to temperature. Are the measurements that you are making here adapted to a specific cultural environment?
The measurements are mostly of the physical environment, but there are, as you said, there are differences in how people experience the heat or how comfortable people feel outdoors, depending on other factors. So not just the atmospheric factors that Marty measures, but things like your clothing, your age, your weight, how active you are, your metabolic rate, if you're sitting under a tree versus biking or running. So all of these factors determine how comfortable you feel. So Marty only measures the environmental factors, not the personal or cultural factors. But you could add those on to the measurements to see how people experience these conditions differently in different cultures.
In which places have you been measuring those factors?
So Marty has been to mostly to the Phoenix metro area because that's where Marty lives and was born. But Marty was in Tucson. Marty was in Savannah, which is a neighborhood just outside of Tucson. Marty also went to Los Angeles twice on a road trip to measure cool pavement in Los Angeles and trees in vulnerable neighborhoods and in mobile home parks. And we had plans to get Marty to Kuwait, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to cancel those plans. Maybe in the future.
It's been a big impact for science and everything, right?
It definitely had an impact, but luckily, most of the research that I do is related to outdoor environments, and it is much easier to keep people safe and conduct research safely outdoors with masks, social distancing. Marty's sensors actually are 6 feet apart, so Marty is perfect for social distancing.
Right. Apparently, it was well designed for the pandemic. And now, with the new public health conditions, the open spaces in urban environments are much more relevant.
Yes, they are really important for people to be able to socialize, to be active, because we're trying to avoid indoor spaces. And it's really that this makes it even more important during these times of the pandemic to improve those outdoor spaces so that people can socialize and be active outdoors during the pandemic.
And you mentioned this project, 50 Grades of Shade. What is this project about?
This study originated in discussions with cities here in the Valley, Tempe, Phoenix. A lot of these cities have very ambitious goals to increase their tree canopy cover. So they have really recognized the importance of shade for people's comfort and for people being active outdoors.
It was a city initiative?
In talking with the city of Tempe, oftentimes when we talk about these increasing tree canopy cover, an issue arose that the city said, well, we would love to increase tree canopy cover, but there are so many infrastructure challenges that we face that it's sometimes really tough to plant trees because there are overhead power lines, there are sewer lines underground, businesses complain that people can't read the signage. So there are a lot of places where the city would really like to plant trees, but there are these infrastructure challenges that they face. So the idea was, hey, can we use other shade alternatives in places where it's just difficult to plant a tree? So could we use shade sails or canopies, umbrellas, overhangs? And so this is how this study originated. We were looking for alternatives in places where it's really difficult for cities to plant trees. And what we did is we took Marty on the road and we measured 159 locations in and around Tempe. We measured any type of shade that you can think of, engineered and lightweight shade, which would be umbrellas, overhangs, shade from buildings, also shade from trees, pergolas, and so on. And we wanted to know which of these shade types are most effective for keeping people comfortable when it's hot outside.
What shade is the best one?
In summary, any shade is great. So there's no shade that's not working, except maybe palm trees. Palm trees are iffy, but in essentially any shade is great, but there were differences in the shade performance depending on essentially the density of the shade. So if you had a native tree, such as a Palo Verde, that would have a little bit less effective shade because it's more transparent, it's more transmissive than if you have, for example, a ficus tree or non-native trees that require more water but provide a denser shade. Also, shade from buildings was really effective because that's a really solid shade. So if you're in the shade of a tall building in the afternoon, that's actually really effective. But then on the flip side, those buildings heat up during the day and because they're impervious. So then at night you would have slightly increased air temperatures. But during the day, because of the shade of these tall buildings, you get a really big benefit from that shade.
Trees that are non-native provide a bigger canopy or denser canopy, and they need more water. There's a factor in the design on which tree to choose.
Exactly. It's all about trade-offs.
It will be fantastic to have like a toolkit where that information will be described so it can be used for landscape architects, planners, urban designers.
Yes, and in fact, we are developing a toolkit currently that allows you to design your shade type on a website. You could say, well, I have a tree, or maybe I have a bus stop shelter. And then you can specify the size of the shade type and the material. And then the website will give you a shade performance curve. So it will compare the shade that you have created on that website to a location that would be sun exposed. So you get the benefit of that particular shade structure. And so hopefully cities can use this toolkit once it's ready, can use this toolkit to make decisions about shade types in places where trees are not an option. And you could look at the orientation of the shade, because it also depends sometimes on the orientation, but because shade travels, right, during the day. You could look at different times of day. You could say, well, if I put this shade structure over here, that's really beneficial in the morning, but maybe not beneficial in the afternoon. But then maybe people are using that space mostly in the morning. So then that's the most important time of day. And you can essentially make decisions based on these shade performance curves as you design your shade structure. So hopefully that's going to be helpful in making decisions about which shade to choose if trees are not an option.
It's impressive how design decisions can improve with your research data. What are the main features of natural shade? How different materials impact shade comfort?
The more solid shade will be better, but it also depends on the actual material of the shade. So if you have a type of shade that heats up quickly, then you get the added radiation from the top, right? That radiates down at you. Whereas if you have a more lightweight shade, you may not have that much of this long wave radiation hitting your head, but then you may not get as much of the shortwave radiation reduction either. So it really depends on the material of the shade. It also depends on the distance of the shade from your head. So for example, there's a PV structure in front of the Memorial Union at ASU, and it provides shade to people who go to the Memorial Union to have lunch and to socialize. And that shade structure is 10 meters tall. So it's actually very, very far away from people's head. And those PV panels heat up, obviously, during the day as the sun hits them. They actually get quite hot. But because they're further away from people's head, you don't have this immediate radiation that hits your body. So there's more mixing. And so that's better. But if you were to place them at 2 meter height, where they're very close to people's head, it would actually be quite warm underneath.
Oh, so the umbrellas that we use might not be as good as we think.
Yeah, we actually found that especially PVC umbrellas that have like this plasticky material, they were actually slightly warmer underneath than if you were standing under a tree, for example, because of the material and the distance to a person's head.
Right. Yeah, but it's still a better option to walk in the desert with an umbrella as protection, rather than not using an umbrella.
Right. And that goes back to the comment. Any shade is great. So if a PVC umbrella is the only thing you have, please use it.
I own a big umbrella with a reflective material, and I feel so safe walking in campus.
Yeah, and that's actually the best thing you can do. If there's no shade in the urban environment, bring your own shade, bring your umbrella, bring your hat. Those are actually pretty effective mitigation strategies that you can do yourself, and you're not reliant on the built environment and how it's designed.
Yeah, so it's a safe idea to use hats or sombreros who provide sombra or shade.
Exactly.
In the study, you mentioned that you guys measure 159 types of shade. All of these shades were measured in an urban environment?
Yes.
How did you arrive to so many different types of shade?
There were some open reference locations amongst the 159, but we looked at the urban environment and picked anything that we could find that would provide shade. So these 159 locations include various tree species, also different sizes of trees, shade sails, different types of materials of shade sails. So it was essentially 159 locations. but the shade types were not 159, but they were a considerable amount of different shade types.
And you probably found a pattern in the measurement?
So we found that during the day, shade from urban form was really most effective in reducing the mean radiant temperature, also the surface temperature under the shade structure. And then the second most effective were trees and lightweight structures, such as the shade sails. And shade from urban form performed differently with orientation. So depending on if you have a north-south street versus east-west and the orientation of the building, so that would vary. But the urban form shade was the most effective shade overall.
Is there a chance that your study or the knowledge that you are producing can be considered in the code or in the local code for the cities, for example?
Yes, we really do hope that these findings will inform decision-making in cities in the Southwest. Changing code is always a long process, takes a lot of time, but I think there's a lot of valuable information here to inform new developments or even redesigns or redevelopments of neighborhoods to provide more shade, especially in areas where you cannot plant a tree.
Yeah, that might be a crusade of all of us who wants to make this environment safer and shadier. You know, I had the honor to collaborate with the regional pedestrian plan, and one of my contributions was in the walkability toolbox, where I led the discussion about shade and pedestrian comfort. Because these guidelines were adopted in 2014, I would have liked to see a different speed when adopting the guidelines in the urban and rural environments.
Yeah, that's a big issue. It's at least with research that I'm doing with Marty, I feel it's research that has the potential to being used as opposed to just sitting in a shelf and my best 5 colleague friends are going to read the paper and cite it and that's it. So it's something that can be used in practice, and we're actively working with the city of Tempe and the city of Phoenix and other cities in the valley to make this actually actionable and try to use these results to change how we design our environment and to change code and to change policy. But it really takes time.
Ariana, I express my most deep admiration for the work that you're doing. I really hope more people can learn about what you guys are discovering and producing. I think with the global warming condition, with the housing crisis, with all these conditions that are ahead of us, I think it's super important that we can have access to what you're doing. Ariane, can you please tell us more about this cool pavement project?
Yes.
When I go to Phoenix, I really have an experience because the tires of my car basically start melting. What is that? Why we have our streets painted black in the desert?
Well, it's the color of asphalt, and unfortunately, because it's a very dark color, it is really good at absorbing the heat during the day. So as the sun hits the asphalt surface, the surface and the subsurface heats up, gets really hot. So if you were to touch it, you could probably burn your fingers in 3 seconds. And so this black asphalt, unfortunately, well, is being used to pave our roads. So the idea to mitigate this heat is to change the color of the pavement. So if the asphalt were a lighter color, you would have more of that energy that actually hits the asphalt during the day, more of that sunlight being reflected back into the atmosphere. So the actual surface of the asphalt stays cooler during the day, which then, in theory, at night also reduces the urban heat island, which happens because all these surfaces heat up during the day and then slowly release the heat at night. So the city of Phoenix implemented a cool pavement. So they sealed the asphalt with a lighter color. And we conducted a study last year to see what impact this has on different heat metrics. So we looked at the impact of the cool pavement on the surface temperature, the actual temperature of that pavement as you were to touch it. the temperature that's above the pavement, the air temperature, and then also the radiant temperature using MARDI to see how a pedestrian would feel walking over these surfaces.
And did you discover the differences between the pavement that is black versus the pavement that is painted?
Yes, there were actually quite big differences between the surface temperature of the actual asphalt, the regular asphalt, and then the surface temperature of the cool seal or the lighter colored asphalt. So we found that if you compare the regular asphalt to the cool seal, that the cool seal's surface was 12 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the actual regular black asphalt. So that's quite significant.
Wow. 12 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, 12 degrees Fahrenheit. And in terms of air temperature, we found a slight reduction, but it was really difficult to quantify because there's a lot of mixing in the air. So we found about up to half a degree cooling in the evening. And then the mean radiant temperature was slightly increased over the higher reflected surface, just because you have more of the shortwave radiation being reflected at your body as you're walking over those surfaces. But it's a necessary trade-off if you want to reduce the surface temperature and then also the air temperature, because the energy needs to go somewhere, right? And it's not very common that people would walk in the middle of the road. So it was the reflectivity was very similar to a sidewalk, which is concrete. Concrete is a lighter color, and so the asphalt that had been coated with the cool seal had a reflectivity and also a surface temperature that was very similar to concrete.
Where we can find those streets with this cool seal?
I think that the city of Phoenix has a website that lists all the locations. They picked one neighborhood in each of the 8 districts that the city has, so that they have a cool seal location in each of the districts.
I'm sure they will have a good opinion, right?
Yes, we also, as part of the study, we also conducted a survey with the residents who live in those neighborhoods, and we're still crunching the numbers, but it was interesting to hear their perspective on the cool pavement, and opinions varied widely, right? Because people have different interests and different goals, but it was very interesting to see the wide variety of feedback we received. And that's important feedback for the city as they're moving forward with the program and implementing more and different products in the next phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have this vivid memory arriving to San Francisco by plane where you see, I will say 95% of the rooftops painted white.
The city of Phoenix, in fact, several years ago had an initiative under Mayor Greg Stanton to coat or paint city-owned buildings with a white roof. And they actually did that. So all the city-owned buildings have lighter colored roofs to increase the reflectivity and reduce the amount of energy that's actually stored in the roof surface.
I imagine that helps with the AC units that will be spending less energy.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Do you think the local governments will include these guidelines in the code soon?
I hope so. I'm not very familiar with the process of getting it into the code because I'm a researcher, but I think cities here in the Phoenix metro region are very aware of the heat problems and they're actively trying to find solutions. The city of Phoenix just established one of its first of its kind heat offices. So Dr. David Hondula is the first heat officer for the city of Phoenix, and so that shows you that there's a lot of willingness and a lot of momentum and energy to try to change things and make it more comfortable for people here. Acknowledging that conditions in the future are not going to get better, more likely they're going to get hotter, more extreme in the future.
In documentaries and even in graduate school, the city of Phoenix is depicted as a bad example of planning because the way that the city has spread out and its density. But when I talk to people who live in Phoenix, everyone seems to love living in Phoenix.
Yeah, I think Phoenix is very is very comfortable and convenient to live in. Not comfortable in terms of temperatures, but just a very convenient. If you own a car, you can get anywhere by car, and there's air conditioning everywhere. So it's cheap. Homes are comparatively cheap. If you go to California, you pay much more for your home than you do here. So I think that's, and people like to have space. Parcels here are much larger than they would be in the East Coast, for example. So I think that's what attracts people. And also the really nice weather in the winter. That is also a big sell. It's hot for 3 or 4 months in the summer, but the rest of the year is just perfect. So I think these are big things that draw people to this area.
Well, I have 23 Celsius in my room right now. That means 73.6 Fahrenheit. It's lovely. It's perfect.
Yeah, same here. I think it's close to 80 degrees here today. And it's November. It's Thanksgiving. So it's really nice.
So, Ariane, you've been sharing your research with Marty, and I heard that you have this Martini robot.
Well, as the name suggests, Martini, it is smaller. So one of the issues with Marty is that Marty is fairly large. As I said, the cross arms are 6 feet apart, and Marty is about my size. And Marty is also very expensive. It's a equipment that amounts to about $20,000. So not everyone can just build their own Marty and use Marty because it's there are all these hurdles. So the idea with the Martini project is to build a mini Marty that is lower cost, but measures the same parameters, the same atmospheric parameters. So the mini Marty is a small box, and it has an air temperature sensor, a humidity sensor, and then there is a thermocouple, which is a temperature probe, and we stick a gray ping pong ball over this air temperature sensor, and that ping pong ball mimics to be the body of a person, so that can measure the globe temperature, which then can be translated into this mean radiant temperature that Marty measures. So essentially, Martini is a small box with really a bunch of low-cost sensors. It's in the range of $200 as opposed to $20,000, and it measures the same parameters as Marty. So Martini is also, in addition to the meteorological information, capable to count people in the shade and sun. So there's a camera in the box that gets a video feed. The video is not stored. It just receives the video. It does a people detection, and then it overlays the people it detects with the amount of shade that it sees in the urban environment, so you can count people in the shade and sun. And the goal with this project is to place Martini in public places. We are working with the city of Tempe on this project. We had some testing done last month where we placed Martini in a park, a Kiwanis Park, a very popular park in Tempe, at a playground, to see how the space is being used, how many people use the playground at certain times of day, and then also what are the meteorological conditions at the same time. Because the cities, they don't know how people use spaces. They build a playground and they put a shade structure over the playground, but they don't have the manpower to send people out to see if actually people use the space and how they use the space. So hopefully Martini will help the city better understand how people use public spaces as that behavior changes with the weather conditions.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, hopefully we will have, once we're still in the prototyping phase, but once we have a working model that's stable, it would be great to have Martinis everywhere.
It's around $200?
Yeah, it's about $200. The most expensive piece is the mini computer in the box that does the people counting. That is about $100. All the other sensors are a couple dollars. The ping pong ball is 50 cents. It's fairly cheap.
I wish to see soon many Martys or Martinis everywhere in the open space to better understand the human-climate interactions in the environment.
This first sample is a sound of Marty measuring the urban environment. you can hear a clicking sound. It happens every 2 seconds, and that's the time when Marty actually records the measurement of the sensors and stores it on the compact flashcard. So if you hear this clicking sound as you're operating Marty, you know that Marty is alive, Marty is working, and Marty is measuring the urban environment.
And what can we hear in this second sample?
The second sample is a sound sample of cars driving over cool pavement in the city of Phoenix. It sounds like regular asphalt. There's no difference in sound between the cool pavement and the regular asphalt, but there is definitely a difference in the surface temperature of these two surfaces that your car tires experience as they go over these streets. The third sound sample is a recording of kids playing at a playground that was shaded using a huge shade structure. And it's a very busy playground here because there's a lot of shade. So a lot of families come here on the weekends to have their kids play here because of this big shade structure.
Which place would you like to invite all of your colleagues to?
That's an excellent question. Well, so we talked about shade, and I think one place that is interesting because it has really been transformed over the last several years is the place I mentioned when I talked about the research with Marty. It's the photovoltaic canopy that ASU built in front of the Memorial Union. Because that I remember the space to be empty. In the summer, there was nobody there. It was a very harsh space, no shade at all. So students would go to the Memorial Union, grab their food, eat inside, and then leave. And after ASU installed this photovoltaic canopy, this place has been completely transformed. So now before COVID, there were concerts in that space. Now students take their lunch outdoors. They sit under the PV canopy and have their lunch safely outdoors with COVID. And so this shade structure has really transformed this space. So it's a really excellent example of what you can do with engineered shade and how you can transform spaces to make them more comfortable for people to be outdoors.
In a more personal way, where will you treat all your beloved people?
At home. I love to cook and I love to host parties. So I would invite them all over and then cook for them.
Will you cook a German dish?
It varies, but yeah, I could do a German dish. I could do Schnitzel or maybe Spätzle or something German. But I love Italian food, so I would probably do some pasta or maybe some steak.
Whoa, I love Italian food. I'm up for a lasagna right now.
Yeah, come on over.
Will you share your favorite place or your favorite movie?
My favorite place in Arizona is Havasupai Falls. It's just a very beautiful place. And it's at this point still very protected, but it's mind-blowing. It's amazing. So that's my favorite place here.
Where is that place located?
It's close to the Grand Canyon, or actually in the Grand Canyon. It's on the southwest side of the Grand Canyon. And you can't drive there, so you have to hike. You have to hike or take a helicopter, so there's no roads that lead into that space.
Oh, it's unique. It's like a little secret.
It's very unique. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very unique. Yeah, I think it may have been closed during COVID, I'm not sure if they opened it to tourists again, but it is a very, very secluded space, has a really beautiful waterfall, lots of nature. It's just amazing.
Is it under the shade or is exposed to the sunlight?
There are actually quite a few trees because of the water. So it is a fairly green area, I would say, and they're tall, not mountains, like the canyon walls that also provide a lot of shade.
Yeah, perfect. And if you can share your preferred song.
My favorite song is actually "Summertime" of Gershwin, Ella Fitzgerald. I had to think long about this, but I think that's really my favorite song.
Thank you for this conversation, Ariane. This episode was produced by Sombra Urbana. Our theme music comes from Hondo Uno, used with permission by composer Sebastian Carreras. Art direction by estudio5.cl. Visit crossingcitylimits.com for more resources and suggestions for upcoming episodes. Please subscribe on your favorite platforms. Thank you for listening.